The rain fell like cold needles against the glass, washing the neon lights of Seattle into a blur of color and silence. Evelyn Hart stood at the edge of the sidewalk, clutching the handle of a worn brown suitcase that had once rolled through the marble floors of penthouses. Now it dragged through puddles and grime. Her reflection on the shop window looked like a stranger wearing her face hair-damp mascara. Faded shoulders bent beneath a heavy wool coat that was no longer warm. Inside the electronics store window, a row of televisions flickered the same headline across every screen. Mercer divorce scandal. Evelyn Hart refuses to return money. The anchor's voice was sharp, merciless. Her photo flashed next to Liam Mercer's, her ex-husband, the man once described as America's most disciplined billionaire. His face looked detached, carved from ice. The caption beneath read, sources claim, Evelyn took advantage of her husband's trust fund. Evelyn's throat tightened. People passed her on the street, holding umbrellas, whispering when they recognized her. Months ago, strangers would stop to take selfies, ask about her skincare, her love story, the perfect marriage that had filled magazine covers. Now their glances cut like glass. One teenager lifted her phone to record, murmuring, "That's her, the Mercer ex-wife." Evelyn turned away quickly, pulling the collar of her coat higher. She kept walking until her heels broke on the slick pavement. She stopped near a 24-hour gas station where the lights hummed and the smell of gasoline clung to the air. A paper sign taped to the glass door read, "No loitering." She laughed quietly, bitterly. She could not afford even to stand still. Her fingers were numb as she counted the crumpled bills in her pocket, $7 and change. Enough for coffee and maybe a sandwich. Not enough for a room. The last of her savings had gone to storage keeping, boxes of her old life locked behind a metal door. Dresses she would never wear again. Sketches from her design studio, her wedding dress sealed in a plastic garment bag she could not bring herself to throw away. She sank down onto the cold concrete step beside the gas station. Rainwater gathered near her shoes. For a moment she wanted to disappear into it, to dissolve into the rain, to stop existing as the woman who had once had everything. "Miss, you can't sit there," a man behind the counter called through the glass, his tone tired but not cruel. Evelyn nodded faintly and rose to her feet. Her body swayed with exhaustion. She walked again without knowing where to go. At the corner of Fifth Avenue stood a small diner, Rosa's Diner, its red sign flickering weakly in the rain. Through the window she saw warm light, the kind that could almost fool you into believing the world was still kind. A woman in her 60s was wiping the counter, humming softly to an old radio song. Evelyn hesitated at the door, her hand trembling as she pushed it open. The bell above the door rang. The smell of coffee and cinnamon surrounded her. The woman looked up, her eyes lined by years but gentle. "Honey, you look frozen," she said, her accent carrying the soft rhythm of Latin warmth. "Sit down before you fall down." Evelyn managed a weak smile. "I don't want to bother you." "You're not bothering me," the woman said, pouring a cup of tea and sliding it across the counter. "You look like you haven't been seen in a while." Evelyn wrapped her fingers around the cup, letting the heat bite her skin back to life. "Maybe because I don't exist anymore," she murmured, her voice cracking at the edges. The woman studied her for a long second. Everyone exists somewhere, even if they forget where. She pointed to the badge on her chest. Rosa Morales, owner cook therapist after midnight. A faint laugh escaped Evelyn's throat. it felt foreign. She sipped the tea, the taste of lemon and honey soft against her dry lips. "Do you need something warm to eat?" Rosa asked. Evelyn hesitated, embarrassed. "I'm okay, just the tea. You sure you look like you could use a little mercy tonight?" The word mercy stung. It reminded her of Mercer, the name she had carried like a crown, now a curse. "I just need to rest for a minute, then I'll go." Rosa nodded. "You can sit as long as you need. I've been where you are." Evelyn looked up, surprised. "You have different stories, same kind of storm," Rosa said simply. "You'll find your way out, too." The rain intensified outside, rattling the glass. Evelyn watched it trace long, trembling lines down the window. Behind the reflection of her face, she saw Ghost's champagne night's gala dresses. Her husband's hand at the small of her back, cameras flashing as he whispered, "Smile for them, Eve." She used to believe love was safety. Now she knew it could also be exile. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She stared at it until the screen went dark again. Probably a reporter or another debt collector. She turned it face down. The clock above the counter showed 11:47 p.m. Rosa returned, placing a small plate beside her, a slice of apple pie still warm. On the house, she said, "I can't, you can," Rosa interrupted. "Eat while it's warm. Everything changes after it cools." Evelyn took a bite. The sweetness broke something inside her. She blinked fast to stop the tears, but one fell, then another. Rosa pretended not to see. She simply turned up the radio. The song playing was an old one about love that left but never really ended. By the time Evelyn finished the pie, the rain had softened to a whisper. She looked through the fogged glass toward the empty street. Somewhere beyond those lights was Liam, her ex-husband, the man who had signed away their marriage in a single afternoon. She wondered if he ever thought of her now, or if she had become another headline he preferred to forget. Outside, a car splashed through a puddle. Evelyn stood, thanked Rosa softly, and stepped back into the night. The air smelled of wet asphalt and old dreams. She walked without direction until the streets grew quiet. Finally, she stopped under a flickering streetlight. Her reflection appeared faintly in the rainwater, pooling at her feet, a blur of gold hair, pale skin, and eyes that once believed in forever. In the distance, a city bus roared by, scattering the puddles. Evelyn whispered to herself, "You can't fall further than this. So maybe it's time to start climbing again." Her voice was barely audible beneath the rain, but it was enough, the first sound of a woman deciding not to vanish. And somewhere across the city, inside a high-rise office that still bore her name on the walls she designed, Liam Mercer sat alone, staring at a photograph of her left behind in a drawer. The same rain beat against his windows, and though he did not know why he whispered into the emptiness, "Are you warm, Eve?" She wasn't, but she was alive. The morning light crept slowly through the mist, washing the city in shades of pale gold and gray. The sign of Rosa's Diner flickered weakly, buzzing like a tired heartbeat. Evelyn arrived early before the open sign was flipped, clutching a damp newspaper she had picked up from a bench. She had circled a few job ads with shaking hands the night before, but found herself drawn back here instead. When Rosa unlocked the door, she simply looked at Evelyn, nodded once, and said, "Coffee's on if you're staying." By noon, Evelyn had a borrowed apron tied around her waist and was wiping tables as though she had done it all her life. It felt strange to belong somewhere again, even if it was a place that smelled like burnt toast and old jukebox songs. Rosa paid her in cash at the end of the day, slipping a few extra dollars into the envelope. "Don't argue," she said. "You'll earn it tomorrow, too." For the first time in months, Evelyn slept without dreaming of courtrooms or headlines. A week later, the man with the gray coat walked in. He ordered coffee, black no sugar, and sat in the corner booth near the window. He came at the same time every morning. Silent eyes lowered a book in his hands. When Evelyn refilled his cup, he nodded politely, but never met her gaze. He always left a $100 bill folded beneath the saucer. Rosa noticed first. "Looks like you've got a guardian angel, honey." Evelyn smiled faintly. "Or someone who doesn't know what change means." But the next morning and the morning after that, he returned. The same seat, the same silence, the same generous tip. One afternoon, Rosa whispered, "I think he's watching you." Evelyn laughed softly. "No one watches me anymore." But when she looked up, she caught the man's reflection in the mirror behind the counter. His eyes fixed briefly on her before darting back to the rain outside. There was something familiar in the tilt of his head, in the way his hand rested on the mug, the faint tremor in his fingers, as though he was holding more than porcelain. She shook the thought away. Her mind played tricks, sometimes filling empty rooms with ghosts of the life she had lost. The stranger kept coming. Sometimes he read newspapers folded in half, sometimes business journals. His wristwatch gleamed with quiet wealth, yet his clothes were understated, as though he was trying to hide the luxury stitched into their fabric. Evelyn found herself wondering who he was. What kind of man tipped like that, but looked so haunted? One night when the rain returned, she caught Rosa staring through the window at his retreating figure. "That's not a drifter," Rosa murmured. "That's someone carrying guilt heavier than his wallet." Evelyn wanted to ask his name, but pride kept her silent. She had once promised herself never to be curious about men again. They looked at her with pity or desire or suspicion, never with mercy. Yet something about this man stirred unease, as though his presence pressed against an old wound she had tried to bury. A week later, a storm hit the city hard. The diner lost power for an hour, and candles flickered on every table. The stranger sat through it all, his book-untouched eyes lost somewhere beyond the window. When he finally rose to leave, he hesitated at the counter. His voice was low, hesitant, carrying the faintest rasp of exhaustion. "Does the owner still close at midnight?" Evelyn froze. Only someone who had been here years ago could have known that Rosa's diner had always closed exactly at 12. Her pulse stuttered. "You've been here before?" she asked, forcing steadiness into her voice. He looked at her for the first time, really looked, eyes gray, steady, familiar. For a heartbeat, the world fell silent. Then he said, "A long time ago." He turned and walked into the rain before she could answer. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She replayed his voice in her head, the cadence, the accent, the way he had said those words like a memory. She sat by her small apartment window, watching the city lights shimmer through the drizzle. Somewhere deep inside, a truth began to stir, fragile and impossible. Across town, in a dimly lit office overlooking the harbor, Liam Mercer sat with a cup of untouched whiskey. His assistant had just delivered a folder of photos. Surveillance reports meant to track former employees accused of leaking company data. Among them was a photo of Rosa's diner. Evelyn stood behind the counter, hair tied back, smile faint but alive. Liam traced his finger over the image, every breath heavy with regret. "She still walks like she carries the world," he whispered. The next morning, Evelyn found another $100 bill under the stranger's saucer, but this time something else was tucked beneath it. A folded note, plain and small, written in neat cursive. She hesitated before opening it. The paper trembled between her fingers as she read the words, "You deserve to be seen again." Her breath caught. When she looked up, the stranger was already gone. 5 years earlier, the world had looked nothing like this. The same city glowed brighter, then filled with laughter, champagne, and the glitter of a love story that everyone envied. Evelyn Hart had been the rising star of interior design, a woman known for turning cold corporate spaces into sanctuaries of light and calm. Her designs were featured in magazines, her name whispered in boardrooms. When she met Liam Mercer, the elusive young billionaire who had built an empire before 35, it felt like destiny dressed in a tuxedo. He was all precision and purpose, a man who measured time in profits and silence. Yet when he looked at her sketches, something softened. "You design places that make people breathe again," he told her during their first meeting. "Maybe that's what I've been missing." Their courtship was a whirlwind of late-night calls, art galleries, and stolen weekends at Lake Chelan where the air smelled of cedar, and the world seemed paused just for them. When Liam proposed, he did it quietly, on a balcony overlooking the city, no cameras, no audience. He slid a ring onto her finger and whispered, "Marry me before I forget how to be human." She had laughed through her tears, believing love could heal ambition. But marriage to a man like Liam Mercer was not a fairy tale. It was a negotiation between hearts and headlines. The media crowned her America's Grace, a name she would later come to hate. They photographed her at charity events, her hand on Liam's arm, her smile perfect. Behind the smiles, cracks formed. Liam's mother, Marianne Mercer, had grown ill, her health deteriorating after years of stress and solitude. Liam withdrew into himself, consumed by guilt and the weight of expectation. Evelyn spent nights alone in their penthouse sketching designs that would never see the light, waiting for a husband who came home too late and spoke too little. When Marianne died, something inside Liam broke in a way Evelyn could not fix. He blamed himself, the doctor's fate, and slowly her. The gossip columns whispered about her background, her rapid rise, her connections. A story began to circulate that Evelyn had redirected charity funds from the Mercer Foundation to finance her personal studio. It was absurd, but the rumors spread like fire. Liam's chief of operations, Clara Voss, presented him with evidence, bank transfers, receipts, whispers. He confronted Evelyn one night in the middle of their marble kitchen, his voice steady, but his eyes hollow. "Tell me you didn't use me," he said. "Tell me this isn't true." She stood barefoot in her nightgown, the city lights painting her in fragments of gold and shadow. "Liam, you think I'd destroy the one thing I built with you. I think he said you've always been building something for yourself." His words struck harder than any slap. "You used my name. You used my heart." Evelyn shook her head, tears blurring her vision. "I used everything I had for you." He turned away. The next morning she found the papers already signed. The divorce hit the media like a thunderstorm. The company's PR team painted Liam as the betrayed philanthropist, Evelyn as the ambitious social climber. Her studio lost every client within a week. She tried to reach him to explain, but every call went unanswered. When she arrived at his office, the guards had instructions not to let her in. The last time she saw him was across a courtroom, his jaw set, his eyes refusing to meet hers. The judge granted the divorce swiftly. She left with nothing but her maiden name and the clothes she wore that day. The first months afterward blurred together, lawyers' headlines betrayal. Friends who had once toasted her vanished. People she trusted sold private messages to gossip magazines. She stopped leaving the apartment. The silence grew heavy, pressing on her lungs until she could hardly breathe. Then came the storage notice. The bank foreclosed on the apartment, and everything she owned was packed away. She wandered for weeks searching for a job, but no one wanted the woman who had been labeled a scandal. Each door she knocked on seemed to echo the same quiet rejection. One evening she walked past the Mercer Foundation building. Her reflection stared back from the glass doors, smaller and frailer than she remembered. Inside, banners still hung with her old designs. The foyer she had once decorated to honor Liam's mother now gleamed under artificial light untouched. She placed a hand against the glass, whispering, "You don't even see me anymore." And somewhere inside, behind layers of steel and regret, Liam Mercer sat at his desk, staring at the same glass from the other side, unaware that the woman he thought had betrayed him was standing just feet away. Evelyn left the city that night. She took a bus to Seattle with 2 suitcases and a silent promise to start over. For years she worked odd jobs never long enough to be noticed. She stopped reading the news, stopped saying his name. The world moved on. He became a symbol of power again, his face appearing on the covers of Forbes and Business Today, while she became a ghost in a borrowed life. Yet even as she washed dishes in Rosa's diner, the memories clung to her. Sometimes the smell of coffee reminded her of his cologne. Sometimes the hum of the refrigerator sounded like the elevator that once carried her to their penthouse. She would shake her head, forcing the ghosts away, but they stayed. Love, she realized, was not a fire that burned out. It was ash that lived in your lungs, and every breath reminded you it had once been flame. 5 years had passed, and the distance between them should have turned their story into dust. But as the stranger kept visiting the diner, leaving his silent tips and his familiar stillness, she began to wonder if destiny was more persistent than pride. It was late again when the door of Rosa's diner chimed open, breaking the quiet rhythm of the rain outside. The clock read 10:48 p.m. The last customer had left half an hour ago, and Evelyn was cleaning the counter while Rosa counted tips in the back. She looked up instinctively and froze. The man who stepped in shook the rain from his coat, water dripping onto the checkered floor. His eyes found hers instantly, and the air between them shifted slow and heavy, like the moment before lightning. Her breath caught. For a second, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her, but it wasn't. Liam Mercer stood there, older now, his face sharper, tired, but unmistakably him. His hair was a little longer, streaked with gray near the temples. He wasn't wearing the tailored suit. She remembered just a dark sweater under a simple gray coat. Still, he carried the same presence that once filled boardrooms and headlines. "We're closed," Evelyn said, before she realized she had spoken. Her voice came out thin, strained. He didn't move closer. "I know," he said quietly. "I just needed somewhere to wait out the rain." Her heart hammered, torn between disbelief and anger. "There are other places." "I didn't want other places," he replied. The words landed softly, almost lost under the hum of the ceiling fan. Evelyn turned away, grabbing a towel to wipe the counter again, even though it was already clean. "You should go," she murmured. "You don't belong here." He stepped forward. "Neither do you." Her hand tightened around the towel. "You don't get to say that," she said, her tone trembling between fury and heartbreak. "You forfeited the right to know where I belong." Liam exhaled, his shoulders sinking. "You're right." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Only the sound of rain filled the space, falling harder, now drumming against the windows, as if it wanted to wash the years away. Finally, he said, "You look different. Homelessness will do that to a person." She snapped before she could stop herself. He flinched, a flash of guilt flickering across his eyes. She looked at him, then really looked, and saw something she hadn't expected: regret. Deep, quiet regret. It clung to him like the rain on his coat. "Eve," he began, but she cut him off. "Don't call me that." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I just know," she said. "You don't get to say you're sorry." 5 years later, in a coffee shop you shouldn't even know about. "I didn't plan this," he said. "I didn't come here to what she demanded. To check if I'm still alive. To see how far I fell," his voice broke. "To make sure you were okay." She laughed bitterly. "You made sure I wasn't, remember." The silence that followed was unbearable. Rosa stepped out of the kitchen, saw Liam, and froze. "Everything all right?" she asked carefully. Evelyn forced a smile. "Yeah, just a customer waiting for the rain to stop." Rosa nodded slowly and disappeared again, though her eyes lingered on them for a moment. Evelyn turned back to Liam. "You should go before someone recognizes you. I'm sure you don't want another headline." He studied her face as if memorizing every new line, every scar of the years he missed. "You think I care about headlines anymore?" he asked. "You always did," she said quietly. He opened his mouth, then closed it. There was nothing left to defend. He sat down at the counter, ignoring the sign that said "closed." "Just coffee," he murmured. She hesitated, then poured it anyway, because anger was easier than pretending she didn't care. She slid the mug toward him. Their fingers almost touched, and the contact, barely there, sent a jolt through both of them. "Why now?" she asked finally. "Why come back after everything?" Liam stared into his cup. "Because I was wrong." She laughed again, this time softly, almost sadly. "Wrong about what?" "About you," he said. "About what happened. About who I became after you left." She folded her arms, forcing herself to stay calm. "And what did you become, Liam?" A man who built an empire and realized it meant nothing without the person who believed in him first. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, and for a brief moment, the storm outside seemed to echo the one between them. Evelyn looked away, eyes burning. "You believed lies over me," she said. "You threw me out like I was disposable. You never asked. You never trusted me." "I trusted the wrong people," he said. "And I've paid for it every day since. Then maybe that's your punishment." He nodded slowly. "Maybe it is." He took a sip of coffee, wincing at its bitterness. "Do you still design?" he asked after a long pause. "No," she said. "Design requires hope, and I ran out of that." "I don't believe that," he said softly. "You were never built to stop creating." She shook her head. "You don't know me anymore." "I never stopped knowing you," he said almost in a whisper. The rain had slowed, now leaving only the faint tapping of droplets against the window pane. Evelyn looked outside at the empty street, then back at him. There was so much she wanted to say, so many words she had swallowed for years, but they all tangled together in her throat. She managed only one. "Why? Because I couldn't live another day pretending you didn't exist," he said. For a moment, she saw the man she once loved, the one who used to whisper plans about a future filled with light and laughter. And for the first time since he walked in, her anger began to tremble under the weight of memory. She turned away quickly, pretending to clean another table. "The rain stopped," she said quietly. "You can leave now." He stood hesitating. "If I go now," he said, "will you still be here tomorrow?" She didn't look at him. "I don't know." He nodded once as though that was an answer he deserved. He placed a $100 bill on the counter the same way the stranger had done every morning and walked toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back at her and said, "I'm glad you're alive." The bell rang softly as he stepped into the damp night. Evelyn stood frozen, staring at the empty doorway long after he was gone. Her hands trembled as she picked up the bill. Underneath it was a small folded note, her own handwriting from years ago, torn from one of her old sketchbooks. "Love builds even when it breaks." Her breath caught. She whispered into the silence, "You kept it." Outside, thunder rolled one last time before fading into quiet. The next few days passed in a haze. Evelyn moved through them like someone drifting between past and present, caught in a tide she couldn't escape. She tried to convince herself that Liam's visit had been an accident, that it meant nothing. But every time the diner door opened, her pulse betrayed her. Rosa noticed it, of course. "You're waiting for him," she said one evening while slicing lemons. Evelyn shook her head, but the denial was too soft to sound real. "He doesn't belong here," she murmured. "Neither do you, sweetheart," Rosa said. But that didn't stop you from staying. The next morning, as Evelyn was mopping the floor before opening, a black car pulled up outside. The tinted window rolled down just enough for a man in a suit to slide out an envelope with her name printed in gold letters. Her stomach dropped. She didn't need to open it to know who it came from. Still, she tore it open, her fingers trembling. Inside was a letter written in Liam's familiar handwriting. "There's a project that needs you. Come to the Mercer Foundation. No titles, no publicity, just work." Beneath the letter was a single business card with a phone number and the words "freelance contract, confidential." Rosa appeared behind her holding a cup of coffee. "Looks like the rain came with an offer," she said. Evelyn sighed. "It's not an offer, it's a reminder of everything I lost." Rosa raised an eyebrow. "Or everything you built that's still standing." That afternoon, Evelyn sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the letter. Her pride screamed no. But Rosa's medical bills sat on the counter, unpaid reminders of the kindness that had saved her when no one else did. Rosa had collapsed 2 nights ago, insisting it was just fatigue. The doctor said she needed rest, maybe treatment. Evelyn didn't have the money for either. The next day she called the number. Liam's assistant answered, efficient as ever. "Mr. Gouin." "Mercer expected your call," she said. "The project begins Monday. You'll report to the design department at the downtown headquarters." Evelyn hesitated, hating that her voice trembled. "Tell him I'm not doing this for him." "Of course," the assistant said smoothly. "You're doing it for the work." When she arrived that Monday, the glass building seemed to tower higher than it had years ago, its mirrored walls reflecting the sky she had once believed belonged to her. The receptionist smiled politely, but with recognition hidden beneath professionalism. "Evelyn Hart," she said. "Welcome back." The words cut. She signed the paperwork, the title reading, "Freelance Consultant." Liam appeared briefly that afternoon. He didn't address her directly. "The foundation's new wing needs redesigning," he said to the team, his voice steady but quieter than she remembered. "I want it to feel human. Evelyn looked up then, and their eyes met for a fleeting moment before he turned away. Over the next few days, they worked in silence, orbiting each other through hallways and meetings. He spoke to her only about logistics, never about the past. But there were moments small, almost invisible, when the air between them shifted. The way he lingered at the door after she presented a concept, the way his hand brushed against hers when they exchanged documents. Each moment was a spark, buried in ash. Late one night, as Evelyn was reviewing blueprints in an empty conference room, she found a sealed envelope tucked beneath the plans. Inside was a hospital receipt. Rosa's name on it marked paid in full. Her heart stopped. She scanned the details twice before the truth settled in. Liam had done it, quietly, anonymously. The next morning she confronted him in the corridor. "You've been helping me behind my back." Her tone was sharp, shaking. He stopped, turning toward her. The exhaustion in his face was raw. "You wouldn't have let me if I asked." "You're right," she snapped, "because it isn't your place anymore." He nodded slowly. "Maybe not, but I still owed you something. You owed me the truth 5 years ago," she said. For the first time, his composure cracked. "You think I don't know?" That his voice was low, but rough, as if dragged through regret. "Every night I see your face, and every morning I remember that I was the one who erased it." She swallowed hard, fighting the tears that rose too easily. "Stop pretending this changes anything. It changes everything," he said quietly. "You needed help. I helped, that's all." But she could see it in his eyes, the same guilt that had haunted him across years and continents. He didn't want forgiveness, he wanted redemption, and part of her hated that she still wanted to give it to him. That evening when she returned home, she found another envelope slipped under her door. Inside was a sketch she had drawn years ago, a rough pencil outline of a woman standing in the rain, her reflection blurred. Underneath, Liam had written in neat handwriting, "You once told me design was about turning pain into beauty. Maybe that's what we're doing now." Evelyn pressed the paper to her chest and closed her eyes. Somewhere inside, the ice began to crack, not enough to thaw, but enough to remember warmth. She folded the sketch carefully and placed it in her drawer. Then she whispered to herself, "This isn't forgiveness, it's survival." Across town, Liam sat in his office, staring at the same design on his computer screen, the new layout for the foundation wing. In the bottom corner of the plan, Evelyn had signed her name. It was the first time he had seen it written beside his again. And for the first time in years, he allowed himself to hope that maybe not everything they had built was gone. Weeks turned into months, and the quiet rhythm of work wrapped itself around Evelyn like armor. She arrived early, left late, and avoided eye contact with Liam whenever she could. Yet fate had a cruel way of cornering two people who weren't ready to face each other. One evening, while everyone else had gone home, Evelyn stayed behind in the foundation archives, reviewing old project files for the redesign. The air smelled of paper and dust, the silence thick. She pulled out a folder labeled 2018, Charity Allocation Audit, the year everything fell apart. As she scanned the pages, her pulse quickened. The signatures at the bottom, hers looked off. The strokes, the spacing, it wasn't her handwriting. Her hands trembled. For years she'd told herself she must have missed something, that maybe she'd made a mistake that day under pressure. But now, staring at the forgery, she realized the truth. Someone had framed her. She searched deeper, tracing the audit trail to a secondary file signed by Clara Voss. Her name appeared on every transaction, that had led to the so-called scandal. Evelyn sank into a chair, the weight of the discovery crashing down. Her breath hitched as she whispered, "It wasn't me." The words echoed through the empty room, both a confession and a revelation. The next morning, she confronted the head of finance, asking for digital backups. He hesitated, but complied, saying I was told never to revisit those files. Orders from above. Evelyn took the flash drive and walked out without a word. She knew what she had to do, but the thought of seeing Liam again, telling him this, made her heart race with dread. That night she found him alone in his office sleeves, rolled up tie undone. The city glowed behind him through floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off the glass like stars trapped in concrete. "You're still here," he said when she entered, his voice neutral. "I found something," she replied. "Something you should have found 5 years ago." She placed the folder on his desk. He frowned, flipping through the papers. "What am I looking at?" "The truth," she said softly. His eyes scanned the pages, his expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to horror. This signature." "It's fake," she interrupted. "Every document used against me was falsified. And it's all connected to Clara Voss." He looked up sharply. "Clara? That's impossible. She's been with me for over a decade." "Exactly," Evelyn said. "She had access to everything. She knew how to make it look real." Liam's face paled. He stood abruptly, running a hand through his hair. "God," he muttered, pacing. "All this time." He stopped, turning toward her. "Evelyn." But she shook her head. "Don't. Not yet. You believed her. You destroyed me because of her." Her voice cracked, and he flinched as if the sound itself hurt him. "I was grieving," he said. "My mother had just died. I wasn't thinking straight." "You were thinking clearly enough to sign the divorce papers," she whispered. He fell silent. The hum of the city filled the void between them. For a long moment, he just stared at the folder, his hands trembling. "If this is true," he said finally, "then I've spent 5 years living a lie, built on my own stupidity." "No," Evelyn said. "You spent 5 years punishing the wrong person." Liam sank into his chair, the weight of regret settling over him like a second skin. "I need proof," he said after a pause. "Something undeniable." Evelyn handed him the flash drive. "Everything's on here. Emails, transaction records, even internal memos. She used my name, Liam. She used your trust." He took it silently, eyes glistening in the dim light. Then, without a word, he opened the top drawer of his desk and pulled out a small envelope yellowed by time. "You should have this," he said, his voice breaking slightly. Evelyn frowned, taking it carefully. The handwriting on the front made her chest tighten. It was delicate, looping Marianne Mercer's handwriting. She unfolded the letter slowly, her eyes scanning the faded ink. "My dearest Liam," it read. "If you are reading this, I am gone. There are things you must understand about love. It is not power, nor pride, nor protection. It is surrender. You have always been afraid to need someone, to trust someone. But the right woman will teach you that love is not weakness. It is the only kind of strength worth having. Don't lose her. If you do, you'll lose yourself." Evelyn's vision blurred as tears welled up. Liam was staring at her, his own eyes wet. "She wrote that for you," he said softly. "I found it months after she died. I didn't understand it then. Now I do." The letter trembled in Evelyn's hands. For years she had carried resentment for a family that had looked down on her, for a man who had doubted her. Now she saw the truth. Marianne had seen her differently. "She loved you," Evelyn whispered, "and she believed you could love me too." Liam nodded, his voice raw. And I failed both of you. The silence that followed was not empty this time. It was full of everything they couldn't say. Evelyn reached across the desk, her hand hovering uncertainly before finally touching his. It was a small gesture, tentative, but it carried the weight of forgiveness unspoken. His fingers closed around hers, almost afraid to hold too tightly. "You don't owe me anything anymore, Liam," she said quietly. "You don't have to make this right for me." "Then let me do it for her," he said, voice trembling. "Not to owe, but to honor." The city outside seemed to hold its breath. He stood pressing the flash drive into his pocket. "I'll handle Clara. I'll fix this." "Fixing it won't erase what happened," Evelyn said. "No," he admitted, "but maybe it can finally give us peace." She nodded slowly. "Peace isn't something you find, it's something you build." Their eyes met again, and for the first time in years, there was no anger between them, only exhaustion and a fragile thread of understanding. He looked at her as though seeing her for the first time, not as the woman he lost, but as the woman who had survived without him. "You deserved better," he said simply. "We both did," she replied. They stood in silence for a moment longer before Evelyn gathered her things and turned toward the door. "Good night, Liam." "Eve," he began, but she stopped him with a look. "Don't call me that," she said gently. "Not yet." She left the office, the echo of her heels fading down the hall. Liam sank back into his chair, staring at the folder, at the letter, at the ghost of everything he had ruined. Outside, lightning flashed across the skyline, illuminating the reflection of his own face. In the window haunted, older but finally awake. In another part of the city, Clara Voss stood in her penthouse, pouring herself a drink when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the message and froze. "We need to talk. Now. LM." The glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. She knew the past she buried was clawing its way back, and this time she wouldn't be able to talk her way out of it. Back at her apartment, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the letter from Marianne beside her on the nightstand. For the first time in years, she didn't feel broken. She felt unfinished, like a chapter finally reopening after too long in the dark. The next morning began like any other, but tension coiled beneath the glass calm of Mercer Holdings. Evelyn could feel it in the air when she entered the lobby. The way people whispered, the quick looks exchanged between assistants. Something was shifting. Liam had been in his office since dawn door closed. Blinds drawn, rumors spread fast in buildings made of glass. She carried her sketches upstairs anyway, telling herself this was just another day of work, but her heart knew otherwise. When the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, a hush fell over the corridor. Clara Voss stood near the conference room, her sharp heels clicking on marble, her smile cold as steel. "Ms. Hart," she said smoothly, "didn't expect to see you up here again." Evelyn met her gaze. "Funny," she said. "I could say the same." Clara tilted her head. "I'd be careful if I were you. People might think you're chasing ghosts or headlines." Evelyn didn't answer. She walked past, pushing open the doors to the boardroom. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy. The entire board was there, faces familiar, from her past life men and women who had once toasted her at charity galas and later watched her fall. Liam stood at the head of the table, his suit dark, his expression unreadable. A large screen glowed behind him, displaying financial documents and digital forensics. When he looked up, his eyes found Evelyn's for a fleeting moment, before shifting back to the board. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "This won't take long." His voice carried quiet authority, the kind that demanded silence. 5 years ago, he continued the Mercer Foundation, lost $2 million from a charity fund meant for education grants. The blame fell on my then-wife, Evelyn Hart. I signed papers. I made statements. I ended a marriage because I believed she was guilty. A murmur rippled across the room. Clara's posture stiffened. "Mr. Mercer," she began, but he raised a hand, cutting her off. "You'll have your turn, Clara." He turned toward the screen, clicking the remote. New evidence has surfaced: forged signatures, falsified transfers, emails routed through proxy servers. All of it traces back to one name, Clara Voss. The room erupted in gasps. Clara's mask of composure faltered for the first time. "That's absurd," she said sharply. "You can't seriously think I don't think." Liam interrupted. "I know." He clicked again, and the next slide showed a chain of emails, Clara's digital signature, and timestamps overlapping with Evelyn's alleged transactions. "You used her login credentials. You rerouted funds through a shell account, registered under a subsidiary you created." Clara's eyes widened. "You have no proof those weren't fabricated by someone else." "This is a setup." Liam's voice hardened. "You're right, it was a setup. Yours." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the flash drive Evelyn had given him. "This contains the entire audit trail. I verified it myself with an independent investigator." He paused, his voice dropping to a cold whisper. "You destroyed the reputation of an innocent woman, and you almost destroyed me with her." Clara's facade cracked, panic flashing across her face. "This is slander," she hissed. "You have no right." "No," Evelyn said, stepping forward. "He has every right. You stole my name, my work, my life." Clara turned, eyes narrowing. "You should have stayed gone, Evelyn. The world already forgot you." Evelyn smiled faintly, but her voice was steady. "Then maybe it's time they remember who I really was." Security officers appeared at the door as Liam nodded toward them. "Ms. Voss," he said, "you're being placed on suspension, pending a full investigation. You'll surrender your ID and leave the premises immediately." Clara's gaze darted around the room, desperate for an ally, but found none. The board members avoided her eyes. She laughed bitterly. "You think this changes anything? The damage is done. She'll always be the scandal. You'll always be the fool who loved her." "Maybe," Liam said, "but at least now the truth is louder than your lies." Clara was escorted out, her heels clicking furiously against the floor, until the doors shut behind her. The silence left behind was deafening. Liam turned back to the board, his tone softening. "Evelyn Hart was never guilty. I was. Guilty of believing the wrong person, of letting pride destroy what love built. And I intend to make that right." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to applaud or retreat. One older man finally said, "Mr. Mercer, what do you intend to do next?" Liam looked at Evelyn, and something unspoken passed between them. "We rebuild," he said simply. The meeting ended, and the room emptied slowly, leaving the two of them alone. Evelyn stood by the window, looking out at the skyline, her reflection merging with his behind her. "You didn't have to do that in front of everyone," she said quietly. "Yes, I did," he replied. "They all watched you fall. They needed to see you rise." She turned to face him, eyes shining with unshed tears. "It doesn't erase what happened." "No," he said, "but maybe it gives the truth a place to stand." She looked down at the city streets far below. "It's strange," she murmured. "I thought hearing you defend me would make me feel better, but all I feel is tired." "Maybe that's what forgiveness starts with," he said. "Exhaustion." She smiled sadly. You always had a poetic way of justifying pain. He took a step closer, then another, until only a few inches separated them. Evelyn, he said softly, I can't ask you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know everything I've done since finding that file, since reading my mother's letter. It's because I want to give you back the life I stole. She shook her head, tears finally spilling down her cheeks. You can't give back years, Liam. You can't give back what's already gone. No, he said, but I can give you the truth. I can give you peace. She looked at him for a long moment, then whispered, I already found peace. It just doesn't include you. The words cut deep, but her tone held no cruelty, only honesty. He nodded slowly, accepting it. Then maybe I'll find mine by watching you live again. She brushed past him toward the door, but before she could leave, he said, Evelyn, wait. She stopped her hand on the handle. What? He swallowed hard. For what it's worth, you were the best thing that ever happened to me. She closed her eyes, steadying her breath. Then why did you let me go? His answer came soft, almost broken. Because I was afraid of needing someone more than I needed control. She turned then, meeting his eyes one last time. And now, he said, I'm afraid of never getting the chance to need you again. She didn't reply. She just looked at him for a long, heavy moment before walking away. Outside reporters were already gathering their voices, rising as the story spread. Cameras flashed headlines, updated by the minute. Mercer COO under investigation. Evelyn Hart cleared after 5 years. She stepped into the sunlight for the first time without flinching. The world that had once buried her name was now whispering it again, but this time with awe instead of judgment. Inside, Liam watched from the window as she disappeared into the crowd. For a brief moment, he thought of running after her, but he stayed. Some redemptions had to happen in silence. That night alone in her apartment, Evelyn turned on the news. They were replaying footage from the press conference, showing Liam standing before microphones, his voice steady as he said her name. Evelyn Hart was innocent. She always was. The words broke something open inside her. Not pain release. She whispered to the screen, to the man she once loved, I forgave you long before you said sorry. Then she turned off the TV and let the city's quiet hum cradle her into sleep, unaware that across town, Liam was sitting in his dark office, whispering her name like a prayer. The world moved fast after the confrontation, faster than Evelyn could breathe. Overnight, her name was on every headline again, only this time it was followed by words like vindicated and innocent. Reporters camped outside her building, talk shows dissected her story, and strangers sent flowers to the diner. Yet behind all the noise, she felt strangely empty. The truth had set her free, yes, but freedom came with silence. The adrenaline of redemption faded, leaving only exhaustion and the quiet ache of everything lost in the process. Rosa called it the stillness after the storm. Evelyn called it limbo. Liam reached out once asking to meet. She ignored the message. It wasn't anger, it was self-preservation. She knew if she saw him again, too soon, her heart would forget all the reasons it had learned to protect itself. So she buried herself in work, finishing the foundation redesign and handing in her final drafts. When she turned in the project, she knew she wouldn't come back. A week later, she stood in the middle of her apartment, surrounded by boxes again. History repeating itself, but this time by choice. Portland was calling. A small architecture firm there had offered her a position after seeing her designs go viral online. It wasn't fame, but it was peace, and peace was enough. That night, rain returned to Seattle like an omen. She sat by the window, watching streaks of lightning tear across the sky. Her phone buzzed Liam's name. She almost didn't answer, but something in her chest ached to hear his voice one last time. "Evelyn," he said, the sound of her name breaking slightly. "I heard you're leaving." "Tomorrow," she replied softly. "I think it's time. Can we talk, please?" She hesitated. "There's nothing left to say, Liam. There's everything left," he said. "Just let me see you." She closed her eyes, the silence stretching. Finally, she whispered, "Goodbye, Liam," and ended the call. She placed the phone face down on the table, her reflection faint in the glass. A woman both broken and whole. The next morning the city felt heavier. Gray clouds hung low as she loaded her last box into a cab. She turned back once to look at the diner. Rosa stood in the doorway with a shawl around her shoulders, smiling softly. "You'll come back someday," Rosa said. "Home is where you leave pieces of your heart, mija." Evelyn hugged her tears, catching in her throat. "You're the reason I found mine again." The drive to the airport was slow rain, turning streets into mirrors. Every traffic light felt like a goodbye. Her mind wandered to Liam, how he had looked that day, in the boardroom, raw and human, stripped of pride. For a brief moment she wondered if he was watching the rain too. He was. In his penthouse overlooking the city, Liam sat by the window, a glass untouched in his hand. The office felt emptier without her. Papers piled on his desk, but none of them mattered. The news channels still played his confession, the world now painting him as a man of integrity who had done the right thing. But the redemption he'd earned felt hollow without the one person who should have shared it. He tried calling again, but she didn't answer. He stared at the screen until the phone dimmed his reflection, staring back, tired and alone. By the time he decided to go after her, it was already too late. He rushed through the rain, ignoring the protests of his driver, heading straight for the airport. His heart pounded as he scanned the departure board. Portland, Flight 218, Gate C7. He ran drenched shoes squeaking against the polished floor, breathless not from distance, but from regret. But when he reached the gate, the plane was already taxiing away. Through the large glass window, he saw it lift into the storm clouds swallowed by gray. He stood there soaked and trembling, watching as the woman he loved disappeared again. This time, not because of lies or pride, but because of timing. He whispered under his breath, "Maybe she was never running from me. Maybe she was running toward herself." Evelyn sat by the plane window, her reflection framed by rain trails. The city below looked like veins of light pulsing through darkness. She pressed her palm against the glass, as if saying goodbye to the ghost of who she used to be. Somewhere inside, she hoped Liam would find his peace too, even if it wasn't with her. When the plane landed, Portland greeted her with sun breaking through clouds. She stepped out, inhaling the salt-tinted air. The world felt lighter. She rented a small apartment above a florist's shop, decorated it with soft curtains and sketches pinned to the walls. She started her new job quietly, without press, without spectacle. And at night, when she sat by the window, sketching designs, she found herself drawing rain, always rain, and sometimes a figure standing in it, looking up as if waiting for forgiveness. Back in Seattle, Liam stood on the rooftop of the Foundation building, the wind whipping his coat. He had just finished giving his resignation to the board. The company needs someone new, he told them, someone untainted by the past. They had protested, but he'd made up his mind. For years he had built walls of glass and steel to protect himself, but love, he realized, didn't live in towers. It lived in the spaces he had broken. As lightning flickered across the sky, he whispered her name to the wind. "Evelyn," he said softly. "I'll find you when I've learned how to stay." Down below, the rain fell harder, washing the city clean, as if the heavens were erasing what had been and making room for what could be. And somewhere miles away, Evelyn looked out her new window at the same storm crossing the distance between them. She didn't know he was watching the same sky, but her heart stirred anyway. A quiet echo of something unfinished but not lost. 1 year later, the rain had softened into something gentle, like a memory that no longer hurt. Portland had become home in quiet, steady ways. Evelyn's studio, Heart and Home, sat on the corner of a leafy street, its front window filled with sketches and plants. Inside, the air smelled of cedar and fresh paint. The space buzzed softly with the rhythm of new beginnings. Women laughing, tools clinking, the hum of small miracles being built from brokenness. Her studio specialized in helping women rebuild their lives through design apprenticeships, giving second chances to those who had been forgotten by the world. On the wall near her desk hung a framed quote she'd written on a napkin the day she opened the doors. "Beauty isn't what survives the storm, it's what's born after." Life had become simple, peaceful, but sometimes in the quiet between projects, she would pause her pencil hovering over the page and think of him. Not with anger, not even with longing, just with a soft ache, the kind that comes from remembering something that changed you forever. On a Thursday evening, the air outside turned cold and wet. A storm rolled in from the coast, rain smearing the city lights into watercolor streaks. Evelyn stayed late tidying up before heading home. The clock on the wall read 8:42 p.m. She was locking up when she heard a knock on the glass door. She turned, expecting a client who had lost track of time, or maybe one of her students returning for a forgotten umbrella. But when she looked up, the world stopped. Liam Mercer stood outside in the rain, no umbrella, his hair damp, his coat darkened by water. For a moment, she couldn't move. He looked older, thinner, but there was something softer in his face, an absence of armor. When she finally opened the door, the smell of rain swept in with him. "You'll ruin the floors," she said, her voice trembling despite her calm. "Wouldn't be the first thing I ruined," he said with a faint, rueful smile. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. He looked around the studio, taking in the sketches, the light, the life she had built. "You built a beautiful home," he said quietly. "Without you, I had too," she replied, folding her arms not to push him away, but to keep her heart steady. He nodded slowly. "Then let me help you build it stronger." She let out a soft, disbelieving laugh. "You came all this way to offer construction advice." "No," he said. "I came because I meant to say goodbye 5 years ago, and I said everything but that. I came because I've learned what home means." She looked at him, then really looked. The man standing before her wasn't the same Liam who had destroyed her life with pride and silence. This one carried his guilt like a scar, not a shield. "You left the company," she said. "I saw the article. I did," he said. "It wasn't mine anymore. I realized I was building towers for the wrong reasons. I wanted to create something that didn't trap people. It should set them free. Like what you're doing here." She felt tears sting her eyes but blink them away. "Why now?" He hesitated, his voice low. "Because every day since you left, I kept hearing my mother's words. Don't lose her, or you'll lose yourself. I lost you. I lost myself, and I've been trying to find the courage to come home ever since." She shook her head, struggling to breathe evenly. "Home isn't what it was, Liam." "I know," he said softly. "That's why I'm not asking to go back there. I'm asking to go forward, with you, if you'll let me." His eyes searched hers, and for a heartbeat, time stilled. The rain outside slowed, tapping softly against the windows. Evelyn turned away, walking to her work table, tracing her fingers over the wood. She had sanded herself. "You hurt me," she said finally. "You didn't just take away love, you took away the part of me that believed love was safe." "I know," he whispered. "And I've spent every day trying to be a man who'd never do that again." "Words are easy," she said. "Then don't believe the words," he replied. "Believe the actions. The foundation I rebuilt, the schools I funded in your name, the people I helped, because I remembered what you taught me about building beauty out of pain. I didn't do it to win you back. I did it to deserve to see you again." The truth in his voice hit her like warmth after cold. She wanted to resist it, to cling to the safety of solitude, but her heart, stubborn, hopeful, beat louder than reason. She turned back to him, her voice trembling. "Do you still love me? Every version of you," he said. "The woman I married, the woman I hurt, and the woman who survived without me. Especially that one." She took a step closer, then another. They stood face to face, close enough to feel the warmth between them, the storm outside blurring everything beyond the window. "Say it again," she whispered. "Come home, Evelyn," he said, voice breaking. "Not to the past, to me, to now." Her breath hitched. A tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't look away. "I am home," she whispered. He closed the distance, his hands trembling as they reached for her. She let him. When he pulled her into his arms, it wasn't the desperate embrace of lost lovers. It was the quiet, fragile meeting of two souls who had finally learned how to stay. The world outside disappeared into rain and light. They stood there for a long time, holding on to the peace they had both chased through years of pain. The storm softened. The clock ticked past 9. Somewhere in the background, a candle flickered out. Evelyn pulled back just enough to look at him, smiling through her tears. "You found me in the rain again," she said. "Maybe that's where we were always meant to find each other," he murmured. She rested her forehead against his chest, feeling the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. For the first time in a long time, it didn't hurt to breathe. Outside, the rain stopped completely. 2 years later, the morning sun streamed through the glass walls of the newly completed Hart Mercer Foundation. The building stood near the waterfront in Seattle, a beacon of light and purpose, where once there had only been guilt and regret. Inside, sunlight spilled across marble floors and walls lined with framed photographs. Women smiling, children laughing, lives changed. Evelyn stood near the entrance, her hair loosely tied, her hands clasped in front of her heart, as she watched guests arrive for the grand opening. She had worn a soft cream dress, nothing extravagant, but the way Liam looked at her from across the room made it seem like the whole world had turned to gold. He was different now, his eyes clearer, his presence quieter. The once feared billionaire now moved through life with humility, shaking hands with volunteers, greeting every guest by name. When he approached her, he didn't say anything. He simply reached for her hand, and she let him. Rosa Morales, healthy again and radiant in a floral shawl, stood on the stage holding the ceremonial ribbon and scissors. "You two ready?" she asked, smiling. Evelyn nodded. Liam stepped closer and whispered, "This one's for the people who never stopped believing in us. She smiled faintly, and for the ones we had to become to believe in ourselves. The crowd quieted as Evelyn stepped forward to speak. Her voice, once hesitant, carried easily across the atrium. 2 years ago, I was standing in the rain outside a diner, lost and invisible. I thought I had no home, no purpose, no reason to start again. But then I met people who reminded me that even when life breaks you, there's beauty in rebuilding. That's what this place is about, rebuilding. Not just structures, but souls. She paused, her eyes finding Liam's in the crowd. Forgiveness doesn't change the past, it changes who you become after it. The applause was soft at first, then swelling, echoing through the glass hall, like waves against shore. She handed the scissors to Rosa, and together they cut the ribbon. Light poured through the open doors, as though the world itself was stepping in. Hours later, when the guests had left, and the lights dimmed, Evelyn and Liam walked to the balcony overlooking the bay. The water shimmered beneath the sunset, calm and endless. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't lost everything?" she asked quietly. He smiled, his gaze distant. "Then we'd still be two people pretending success meant happiness. We'd have never learned what love costs or what it's worth." She leaned against the railing, the wind tugging gently at her hair. "You sound like your mother." He laughed softly. "She'd like that." Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "She told me once that real love doesn't need grand gestures. It just needs truth. I never gave you that before?" He opened the box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, with a single diamond set in a band engraved with the words, "Home finally." Evelyn stared at it, tears gathering before she could stop them. "Liam," she whispered. "No pressure," he said quickly, smiling nervously. "I know we already have everything that matters, but I wanted to give you this because it's not about marriage. It's about promise, to stay, to show up, to choose each other every ordinary day." Her voice broke. "You really learned how to say the right things now." "No," he said softly, taking her hand. "I just stopped being afraid of saying them." She looked at the ring again, then up at him. "Yes," she said simply, "not because I need the promise, but because I finally believe it." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly. They stood there in silence as the sky turned from gold to indigo. The city lights flickered to life below, mirroring the stars above. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and together they watched the reflection of the foundation building in the water, two names intertwined forever. "You know," she whispered, "for years, I thought the storm ruined everything. But now I think it just cleared the sky. Maybe that's what love is," he said. "Not the shelter, but the sunrise after." She turned to him, smiling through tears. "You're sounding poetic again, Mr. Mercer." "Only when I'm talking to you, Mrs. Hart Mercer," he replied softly. They kissed, then slow and certain, the kind of kiss that doesn't ignite fire but steadies it, turning it into something that warms instead of burns. The world around them blurred, reduced to light wind and heartbeat. In the distance, Rosa switched off the lights in the main hall and looked up at them from below, shaking her head fondly. "About time," she whispered before locking the doors. As night settled, Evelyn leaned her head against Liam's shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you ever think we were meant to find each other like this?" "After everything, no," he said. "I think we were meant to lose each other so we could finally learn how to come home." the camera would fade out there if it were a movie, the last shot, lingering on their silhouettes, framed by city lights, her ring catching the last gleam of sunset. A new dawn waiting just beyond the horizon. Voice over. She was once homeless. Now she had a home made of forgiveness. When the credits of their story fade in your mind, don't rush to leave just yet. Take one more breath and sit with the quiet, the same quiet that followed Evelyn's final words. Think of that ring on her finger, not as a symbol of wealth, but of forgiveness, of two people who lost everything only to find what really matters, the courage to love again without armor. Maybe you've known that kind of loss. Maybe you've had to rebuild from ruins too. Maybe home isn't a house or a person, it's the moment you finally forgive yourself for believing you were unworthy of being loved. Liam and Evelyn found that truth through pain, through rain, through time, and through the grace of letting go. So before you scroll away, ask yourself if someone who once broke your heart stood at your door again, changed and trembling, would you let them in? Or would you close it, knowing you've finally learned to be whole alone? There's no right answer, only honesty. Sometimes strength looks like staying, and sometimes it looks like walking away with peace instead of bitterness. If this story touched you, if you believe in second chances in love that survives its own mistakes, drop a heart in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've ever found your way back to someone or back to yourself, because maybe your story isn't over yet. Maybe somewhere in the middle of the storm, you're just learning how to come home too. And when that day comes, when you finally meet the version of yourself that survived, I hope you look around and realize that you were never really lost. You were just on your way. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without pain. It means looking at what once hurt you and saying, "Thank you for teaching me who I am." So stay here a little longer, breathe and let that sink in. Love can fall apart. Love can begin again. And sometimes, like Evelyn and Liam, the most beautiful love stories are not about finding someone new, but about finding your way back changed to the same light you thought had gone out. If you believe that kind of love still exists, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story. Because somewhere out there, someone needs to be reminded that broken things can still become beautiful. Maybe tonight that someone is you.